Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Namo Shubhadaya Krishna Vrishthaya Bhutale Srimade Bhakti Vikas Swami Namo Shubhadaya Krishna Vrishthaya Bhutale Srimade Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namire Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Vacharya Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Bhashari Veshatara Nirvaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Guru Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare Okay, Hare Krishna. Welcome back to our discussion on Vedanta Syamantaka. So yesterday we were concluding our discussion on the first Kiran, the first chapter of Vedanta Syamantaka, that was ascertaining all the evidences, the Pramana Nirnaya, that's what we were discussing. Few sections were left. We'll not be going through that in detail today. We'll get into the second chapter. But before that, just one clarification we have to make. So we'll do that and then we'll jump right into the second chapter. So just a quick recap of the conclusion that we arrived at yesterday as the definition of Shabda as given by Sri Jiva Goswami in his Tattva Sandarbha commentary. He says that Shabda should be that by studying which everyone becomes learned, by which anyone upon understanding it can become learned in all subjects. It imparts the ultimate wisdom that purifies sensory perception and the other means of knowing. And it is a Shabda self-manifest since time immemorial. It's a total corpus of authoritative statements and it's the basis of all traditional knowledge. So we discussed each of these points yesterday. And we also saw how Krishna himself gives a very scientific basis of understanding the Shabda Pramana and how we can ourselves experience the knowledge, the realization, that Vijnana, the realization that we attain by studying the Vedic scriptures. So he quotes from, or he speaks in the 9th chapter, 2nd verse, Rajavidya Rajaguhyam Pavitramidam Uttamam Pratyakshavagamam Dharmyam Susukham Kartum Avayam. So we discussed all that. Now, in some of the Upanishadic statements, there is an indication that the Supreme Lord should be understood through speculation as well. So, this is from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. It's mentioned Atma va aradhishtavya shrotavya mantavya nididhyasitavya. Indeed, Maitreyi, one should realize the Supreme Soul by hearing about him, applying one's reasoning power to understand him and meditating deeply on him. So, resorting to verses like this, some of the Vaisheshikas, they propose that, see, it's not only Shabda Pramana, but actually through one's reasoning power also one can understand the absolute truth. But then Srila Vyasadeva, he rejects this hypothesis. He says that, no, the Supreme cannot be known by Anuman because Shastra alone is the source of real knowledge about him. Here Shastra means scriptures like the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, the Purana spoken by Shukdev, Srimad Bhagavatam, which are all part of the Vedas. Yoni, which literally means womb, can also indicate source of knowledge. So this is referring to Shastra Yonitvat, so which is the third sutra in the Vedanta Sutra. Shastra Yonitvat means to understand that absolute truth, one has to go to the scriptures only. So Anuman Pramana is actually not the conclusion according to Vedanta Sutra, which was given by Srila Vyasadeva. And he also quotes a number of Upanishadic statements, saying in the Upanishads itself, it is also mentioned that Tam Tau Upanishadam Purusham Prichami. I'm asking about that person who is known by the Upanishads. Then from Shatyayana Upanishad, it's also there. One who is ignorant of the Vedas cannot contemplate that Supreme Being. So we see a bit of contradiction here. There's both in this section of Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, it's mentioned that one should apply one's reasoning power to understand him and meditate upon him. But at the same time, it's also mentioned that we can know about him only through the Shrutis. So there are two types of speculation: mental speculation, philosophical speculation. So the conclusion I will get into. So this is a letter that Srila Prabhupada wrote to Chaturbhuj from Bombay on 21st January 1972, and he gives the clarification of why these two contradictory statements are there in the Upanishads. Some places it's mentioned that we have to use our reasoning power to understand him, And other places it's mentioned that no, just accept the Shruti as it is, and that is how you can gain knowledge about him. So Srila Prabhupada writes, as for the difference between mental speculation and philosophical speculation, we take it that everything is known by the psychological action of the mind. So that philosophical speculation is the same as mental speculation if it is merely the random or haphazard activity of the brain to understand everything and make theories, ifs and maybes. But if philosophical speculation is directed by Shastra and Guru, and if the goal of such philosophical attempts is to achieve Vishnu, then that philosophical speculation is not mental speculation. It is just like this. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita that I am the taste of water. Philosophical speculation in the accepted sense then means to try to understand under the direction of Shastra and Guru just how Krishna is the taste of water. The points of Bhagavad Gita, though they are simple and complete, can be understood from unlimited angles of vision. So our philosophy is not dry like mental speculation. The proper function of the brain or psychological activity is to understand everything through Krishna's perspective or point of view. And so there is no limit to that understanding because Krishna is unlimited. And even though it can be said that the devotee who knows Krishna, he knows everything, still the philosophical process never stops. And the devotee continues to increase his knowledge even though he knows everything. Try to understand this point. It's a very good question. So this was a question which was asked by Prabhupada's disciple. So Prabhupada is clarifying here that although we get knowledge from Shastra, but still a devotee does not stop. Like, he knows Krishna. Devotee who knows Krishna, he knows everything. Still the philosophical process never stops. And he continues to increase his knowledge even though he knows everything. And this is also reflective of how the Acharyas present their points of view for different verses in Bhagavatam and in several different commentaries also. We will see that in Bhagavad Gita itself, the commentaries which we are aware of, Srila Prabhupada's purports are there, Baldev Vidyabhushan's commentary is there, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary is there. So we'll see the same shloka is being interpreted in different ways. So now we might see some contradiction. Oh, this Acharya is saying something else, this Acharya is saying something else. But as Prabhupada writes here, there are unlimited ways of understanding these shlokas. So it's not a contradiction, it is just a revelation of different aspects and perspectives that can be derived from Krishna's words. And we know as when Krishna comes, performs his Leela here, then there are multiple objectives that he accomplishes. So similarly, his words are also like that. So when he speaks something, there are multiple angles of vision, there are multiple angles through which his words can be understood. And we will see, maybe it will come today, but there are references in which the point of view of Baldev Vidyabhushan is different from that of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, but philosophically speaking, the conclusion which they arrive at, or there's a coherence between these two. These two are related, these two are connected. So it's not going out of the Gaudiya Vaishnava Siddhanta, it's just different perspectives. And this also we can see in the Bhagavatam commentary, Sararth Darshini by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. For the first verse, the Janmadesya Anvyat first verse, he gives 5 different interpretations. And we have read that Srila Prabhupada's version which defines absolute truth, but actually Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he derives the pastimes of Radha and Krishna and the gopis from the first verse of Bhagavatam itself. Okay, so, and he gives 5 different understandings of that also. So it's not contradictory, it's just that there is different ways of understanding, and as a devotee gets more and more realization from his devotion service, then Krishna reveals more and more to him. So the relish is always there. That's why when we say Nityam Bhagavata Sevya, the more and more we read Srimad Bhagavatam, the more and more refined understanding, more and more subtle nuances, they also come within our consciousness. And that relishes, that makes us relish the entire work itself. Correct? So philosophical speculation is required. And this philosophical speculation does happen when devotees are giving Bhagavatam class also. So in one verse, a devotee might give a Bhagavatam class in a different way from another devotee. So his way, his thought process, trying to understand the philosophy, presenting the philosophy, focusing on a specific point, it all creates a variety. So Krishna can be understood in multiple ways. So when it is said that absolute truth should be understood from reasoning and analysis, this is what it means. That Shabda Pramana is perfect. From Shabda Pramana we understand the base philosophical understanding properly. But then the same text, the same words can be understood in different ways, which is in line with what the proper understanding that Srila Vyasadeva gives in the Vedic literatures. Okay, so this is one point. Now, Sri Radha Goswami, he says that since mutual disagreement is seen even among sages, their words cannot possibly determine the truth. So we have already discussed this about Arsha Pramana. So different sages have different opinions. So Nasa Rishi Samatam Nabindam, so that is there. So Srila Prabhupada writes, therefore, how do we resolve this? The conclusion is that one should follow one of the 12 Mahajanas in order to be successful. Krishna is the original Mahajan and he instructed Lord Brahma. Lord Brahma is also a Mahajana. Actually, Krishna instructed everyone in Bhagavad Gita and thus everyone has learned from Krishna. So we have also discussed that we have to get knowledge through the parampara system or through the disciplic succession. Now, Shruti originates from the Supreme Lord, hence eternal and transcendental. So this is the last section of this chapter. So Sri Radha Damodar Goswami, he makes this point that Shruti is actually not defective, it is not man-made, it is Apaurushaya. It is not Paurushaya Shabda, it's Apaurushaya because it comes from the Supreme Lord, and because Supreme Lord is eternal and transcendental, this is the premise, this is the assumption that we are making, therefore Shrutis are also eternal. And this is given in the Shrutis themselves. Vacha Virupa Nityaya, in Rig Veda it's mentioned, O Lord who has multiple forms, please inspire us to glorify you with the eternal words of the Vedas. And similarly in Mahabharata also it comes. In the beginning of creation, the Supreme Lord emitted the eternal, beginningless, endless and transcendental words in the form of the Vedas from which all other scriptures have come. As the Vedas have not been composed by living entity endowed with defects such as error, therefore they are faultless. And in this, Srila Prabhupada writes in his purport to Canto 10, Chapter 2, Text 14 in Srimad Bhagavatam, and he quotes this verse that in Vedic injunctions there are no mistakes, illusions, cheating or imperfection. Unless one understands the authority of the Vedic version, there is no purpose in quoting Shastra. No one should violate the Vedic injunctions. Rather, one should strictly execute the orders given in the Vedas as stated in Bhagavad Gita. Tasmat Chatram Pramanamte Karya Karya Vyavasthito Jnatma Shastra Vidhanuktam Karma Kartum Iharhasi. One should understand what is duty and what is not duty by the regulations of the scriptures. Knowing such rules and regulations, one should act so that one may gradually be elevated. And again, this is realized as one follows the rules and regulations given in the Shastra. Okay, so this ends the first tray of Vedanta Syamantaka entitled Ascertaining the Evidences. So this is what we have said. We started with discussion of all the different types of pramanas and we then zeroed in on to the Pratyaksha and Anuman and Shabda. And we also saw the pros of Pratyaksha, which all places it can be used, Anuman where all it can be used, but their limitations also are there for Pratyaksha and Anuman. And then how Shabda Pramana is perfect. And of the Shabda Pramana, we are resorting to that which is authoritative, which are the Vedic literatures. We also saw the definition that Srila Jiva Goswami gives. And so this is our axiom. So all the knowledge that we gain is from the Vedic literatures. And the rest of the work, that is from the 2nd chapter to the 6th chapter, it is going to present the Vedic evidences to ascertain who is the Supreme Lord of all, the Ishvara, Jiva, Kala, Karma and Prakriti, all that. The basis will be the Vedic scriptures only. Because there is no other way. To understand the Supreme Lord, to understand the absolute truth, there is no other pramana apart from the Shruti pramana. Right. So, 2nd chapter is ascertaining the nature of the Supreme Lord of all. So, he says, Atha prameyani nirniyante. The objects of knowledge, prameya, shall now be discussed. So, there is pramana and there are these 5 prameyas. And he says they are 5-fold and distinguished as God, Ishvara, the individual soul, Jiva, material nature, Prakriti, time, Kala and material activity. Now, there is a work which Srila Baldev Vidyabhushan wrote, it's called as Prameya Ratnavali. So, in the book work itself, the name comes Prameya. So, what is being proved or what is to be known through the study of Vedic literatures. And I think we discussed that also, that of Srila Baldev Vidyabhushan's work, these 3 form a trilogy, that's Prameya Ratnavali, Siddhanta Ratnam, and then we have Govinda Bhashya. So, before one enters into the study of Govinda Bhashya, one should have a clear understanding of Prameya Ratnavali. Then Siddhanta Ratnam is like imperative, it must be studied before entering into Govinda Bhashya, because there he gives analysis of all the thesis that he is going to present with specific references from different sources. So it is not a sutra by sutra work, but it's basically a Vedanta Prakarana. We discussed about that also, where he gives all kinds of definitions, and it is, it removes all the doubts and misconceptions. Having and after attaining that knowledge, then one can get into the study of Govinda Bhashya. So there's a correlation between what we are studying now and what Prameya Ratnavali gives. So, so there are 9 Prameyas. So to save time, I'll not be reading this verse. So first one is that Lord Vishnu is the supreme. So how the work goes in Prameya Ratnavali, Baldev Vidyabhushan, what he does, he gives the titles. These are like different sections of Prameya Ratnavali. There are totally 9 sections, and each of these sections speak about a specific tattva. It can be the first one, Lord Vishnu the Supreme, then he speaks about that, and then he gives references from different Vedic scriptures. And those references, some of them are derived from Radha Damodar Goswami's works only. This work basically, Vedanta Syamantaka. So Lord Vishnu is the Supreme, it's talking about Ishvara, right? He is to be known by means of all sacred scriptures. Now he gives indication to Pramana and Ishvara. The material world is real, he's talking about Prakriti, all those different aspects. Difference between the living entity and Lord Vishnu is real. If you see from the context of Prameya Ratnavali, he is basically defeating all this Mayavadic and impersonistic understanding that living entity after liberation becomes or comes to the same level as Brahman, as Lord Vishnu. So he refutes those principles here. He says the difference between the living entity and Lord Vishnu is real and it never goes off. So there he is talking about Jiva and Ishvara. The living entities are servants of Lord Hari's lotus feet, again Jiva and Ishvara. There is gradation among them. So among the living entities also, there are gradations. And how are these gradations? These gradations are based upon the modes of material nature. So there are living entities in Tamoguna, in conditioned nature. There is living entity in Rajoguna, Sattoguna. And even in the spiritual world also there are gradations. And he explains that these are based on the 5 rasas. So there is devotees on Shantarasa, there is devotees on Dasirasa, Sakhirasa, Vatsalasa, Madhurasa. So there is gradation among the living entities' constitutional position with respect to the Lord also. So there is a gradation amongst living entities. So it's not that living entities also merge together. It does not happen. Then liberation is the attainment of Lord Hari's feet. Again, speaking about the Jiva, Ishvara, then Karma, then Prakriti, how liberation can be attained from karmic reactions. How the Prakriti, how material energy actually binds the living entity, how Ishvara is the controller of Prakriti. So all those things are explained in this particular section. Selfless worship of him is the cause of liberation. Again, speaking about Jiva and Ishvara. And then 9th is direct perception, inference and verbal testimony are the 3 kinds of evidence. So speaking about Pramana. So we see that his 9 Prameyas are basically only speaking about these 5 tattvas which we are studying in Vedanta Syamantaka. So we just wanted to give that understanding. And in Srimad Bhagavatam, this Canto 2, Chapter 10, Text 12, it's mentioned that of these 5, Ishvara, Jiva, Karma, Kala and Prakriti, of these 5, we'll read this verse. Dravyam karma cha kalascha swabhavo jiva evacha yat anugrahata santi nasanti yat upekshaya. So the translation goes, one should definitely know that all material ingredients, which means Prakriti, activities, karma, time, kala and modes and the living entities, Jiva, who are meant to enjoy them all, exist by his mercy only, which means Ishvara. And as soon as he does not care for them, everything becomes non-existent. So when we speak about 5 tattvas in Vedanta Syamantaka, one thing that we understand is that the rest 4, which is Jiva, Prakriti, Kala and Karma, are actually dependent on the Supreme Lord Ishvara. So these 4 cannot be understood independently of Ishvara. So if we have to have perfect understanding of who Jiva is, what are his characteristics, what is his nature, what is Prakriti, how the material energy works, why it is working like this, what is Karma, what are reactions, actions, how Kala is injected and all, we have to understand, and the interactions between them also, it is possible to understand only when we have a perfect understanding about the Supreme Absolute Truth, which is Ishvara, the Sarveshvara. Otherwise, our understanding of these 4 will always be problematic. Okay. So that is why when we are speaking about the 6 systems of philosophy, only one system, Uttar Mimamsa, is perfect because it gives a perfect understanding about Ishvara, whereas the others, although they are analyzing Prakriti, they are analyzing the position of Jiva, they are talking about Karma also, and how Kala interacts and other things, but because they do not have perfect understanding of Ishvara, their philosophical system do not lead one to the perfect destination or to the highest destination. Correct? So this is also the reason why in Vedanta Syamantaka, first chapter is talking about Ishvara. He does not stop, okay, we are Jiva, so let's start with Jiva. No, we'll start with Ishvara. He is the one who is to be known first. Okay, so first is defining the Supreme Absolute, Ishvara. Among these, God is all pervading, consciousness and bliss personified, and the Supreme Person endowed with transcendental qualities such as omniscience. So, this is the definition that he gives about Ishvara. So, he is all pervading, he is consciousness and bliss personified. Okay, now this might give an indication that it refers to some impersonal Brahman. But then in the next line itself, he says that is Gunavan. He has transcendental qualities. He is Purushottama. He is a Purusha. He is not an impersonal entity. And he is that Ishvara. He is the Supreme Absolute, to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then to prove that, he gives several references. So he gives 5 references from the Shruti. Okay, and we'll be discussing several references to understand what it actually means. So, first one he gives is Vijnanam Anandam Brahma. This is from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. He says Supreme is consciousness and bliss. Now here, when we see, superficially reading this, it might seem that, it's mentioning about Brahma. But then, if you read, it's Vijnanam and Anandam. So here itself, when we speak in a normal sentence also, we see we are talking about a particular boy or a person, or he's a very good boy, or he's such and such, he has these qualities. So when it defines, these verses actually are defining Brahma, they're using all these adjectives. Vijnanam, Anandam, then the second quote is Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Sarvagyaha, Sarvavit. So these are all adjectives, and adjectives means qualities, correct? So even for Brahma, when the Upanishads are speaking about Brahma, they're actually giving him qualities. They're saying that he is consciousness. So the possession of consciousness itself is a quality of Brahma, because consciousness means that one can gain knowledge, one is aware of things, right? It's also mentioned, Sarvagyaha, Sarvavit. He's fully pervading because he's fully conscious of things around, and he is all knowing also. So only when a person has consciousness, he can know something, right? If he does not have consciousness, how can he know something? A material object cannot know anything. So therefore Brahman possesses consciousness, or it has consciousness, or it is consciousness indeed, and it is the Brahman is full of bliss. So in Upanishad statement also, whenever this Brahman is mentioned, actually they are always qualified with these different adjectives. So it refers indirectly to the personified or the personal Brahman, not the impersonal one. Although directly, again, it's Parokshavad. He's not saying, okay, Vijnanam Anandam Krishna or Vishnu or Narayana, like that. Speaking Brahman. But then this Brahman is mentioned here in an indirect way. It's Parokshavad. But then we also see that those who are getting into the study of Upanishads for the first time, or after they have finished all their karma kanda activities, all these things, and get into study of Upanishads, to give them a sense of what the highest transcendental position is, these words like Brahma, Brahman and such things are being used, rather than directly giving the deity's name. Okay. So the system, how it goes is, during one's just a little bit of explanation is required here. When Srila Vyasadeva gives the Vedic scriptures, he has given us the Vedic scriptures, right? So a person gradually elevates himself from the mode of material nature in which he is conditioned. So if a person is tamoguna, then by performing the regulative activities given in the Puranas and in other Vedic literatures, Itihasas and all, he gradually elevates himself from tamoguna, then to rajoguna, then rajoguna to sattvaguna, and then finally to Shuddha Sattva. So that is the gradual progression that one makes. And when we are speaking about this karma kanda activities from the Vedic literatures, they are pertaining to the 3 modes of material nature. Krishna also says, Traividya Vishaya Vedya, Nistari Gunya Bhavarjuna. The Vedic literatures, Shrutis, are basically pertaining to the 3 modes of material nature, and they are meant for gradual elevation of the living entity's consciousness to a highest, or from Tamoguna to Rajoguna, Rajoguna to Sattvaguna, and to Shuddha Sattva. So that's the gradual progression. And in karma kanda activities, there are worship of different personalities. There is worship of Indra, worship of Chandra, Vayu, Surya, worship of Lord Shiva is there, Shakti is there, worship of Vishnu is also there. So all these different types of worship basically is indicating, or a person who's absorbed in these karma kanda activities, he is able to relate to these deities, and that is how he has led his life. Correct? So he is totally into this personalism, and he understands that if I have to satisfy my material desires, then I should go to these particular deities, and if I go to these deities, I will be able to attain different objects for my sense gratification. I will be able to be happy in this material world. Now, when that illusion has to be broken by the study of Upanishads, then something else should be mentioned. The personal form of the Lord is not mentioned for that purpose. What they do is they say Brahman, or this is the greatest personality. We will see in the next reference that the definition of Brahman, what actually Brahman is something who is great, who is transcendental to the three modes of material nature, or who is Vijnanam, who is full of consciousness, who is full of bliss. He is not something of this material world, he is something which is completely beyond and transcendental. So to do that transition, to take that person from his karmakanda consciousness to a higher consciousness, these words, this indirect parokshavad is being used as Brahman, and such terms are being used. And truth, consciousness, eternity, we'll see, supremest consciousness, Vijnanam Anandam Brahma, Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma, Yas Sarvagya Sarvavit, who knows everything, who's all knowing at all. It gives an indication that, okay, I should aspire for that transcendental position which is beyond these three modes of material nature, which is beyond all this material entanglements and the concomitant happiness and suffering which you have experienced till now. So Upanishads speak like this. But then as we go, the gradual study is being done, the Upanishads also speak about the personal form of the Lord. So we will see, those things also Sri Radha Damodar Goswami mentions. So this is a gradual introduction to the Supreme Absolute Truth. First he is speaking about Brahman, and then Paramatma, and then he comes finally to the Supreme Controller, the Absolute Truth, Bhagavan, like this. So he gives references from Upanishads which are apparently talking about Brahman, but then as we discussed, this Vijnanam, Anandam, Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, these are all adjectives, these are all Visheshanas, Vishesha, these are qualities of Brahma. Then yes, Sarvagya Sarvavit, the Supreme Lord is omniscient, which means he is all pervading and fully conscious of everything, and he knows about everything also. He is Sarvavit. Satyakamaha, Satya Sankalpaha, this is from Chandogya Upanishad. The Supreme Soul fulfills all his desires and brings all thoughts into reality. Sa Uttamah Purushaha, he is the Supreme Person. Okay, so these five are basically referring to two different aspects of the Absolute Truth, that's Brahman and Paramatma. So when we speak in Srimad Bhagavatam, in Canto 1, Chapter 2, Text 11, this verse comes, Vadanti tat tattvavidas tattvam yad jnanam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavan iti shabdite. So the Absolute Truth is understood in these three ways. There is impersonal Brahman, there is Paramatma, and there is Bhagavan. But this impersonal Brahman also, at several places, our acharyas define that it is not completely devoid of qualities as well. It's impersonal in nature in the sense that there is no interaction between the Supreme Lord and the Jiva, but that does not mean that Brahman actually does not possess any qualities. Okay, so impersonal Brahman is also conscious. So it's not that impersonal Brahman does not have consciousness, because it's the rays of the Lord and it is spiritual, it's Advaya. The Absolute Truth is defined in these three ways, Brahman, Paramatma and Bhagavan. So we know Bhagavan has consciousness, of course. Paramatma is also conscious, he is doing activities. But impersonal Brahman, does it have consciousness? Yes, it has. Impersonal Brahman is also conscious. It's just that it's not having an interaction or relationship with other living entities. So therefore it is impersonal. So impersonal Brahman is also having qualities of consciousness. Okay, and as the Supreme Absolute Truth, Krishna is always blissful. The quality of bliss is also present in impersonal Brahma Jyoti. So therefore, Vijnanam Anandam Brahma, Satyam Jnanam Ananta Brahma, although they might refer to the impersonal Brahma Jyoti, even if you take this meaning directly, it actually means that they do possess qualities, right? So they are not dead. It's not material. No, they are not dead. Consciousness is there. Blissfulness is there. Now, Srila Prabhupada defines what is Brahman. In Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 26, Text 3 purport, he says, Brahman means great. His greatness is perceived everywhere. And what is that greatness? Consciousness. So Brahman means supreme consciousness, and that consciousness which is not impacted by the modes of material nature. So that is Brahman. So that is why Jiva, the unconditioned Jiva, or the liberate soul which is liberated, the Jiva who is beyond the modes of material nature, he is also addressed as Brahman. And within this material world also, he is sometimes addressed as Brahman, but primarily in the scriptures we'll see, he will be addressed as Purusha. He will be addressed as Purusha because he is trying to enjoy the modes. He is trying to enjoy this material world, so he is called as Purusha at several places. But when he speaks about Brahman, now Brahman can refer to the Jiva because he also has consciousness, and Brahman also refers to the Parabrahman, the Supreme Absolute Truth, because both are conscious. And Vishnu Puran, it is mentioned, Brihatvad, Brihatnatvad, Chayat, Brahmam, Param Viduhu. They know the Lord as a Supreme Brahman because he is great and he nourishes others. So, this is another definition of Brahman, or actually we can say this is the perfect definition of Brahman, because they know, because he is great, that is one thing. So, Brahman is great, but then he nourishes others also, which means that he has the relationship with his creation, he has the relationship with the living entities, which again directs one to the personal form of the Lord. Now in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 7, text 24 purport, actually it's only a section, so because of time constraints, we are not reading the entire section, but it's a very good section. I would recommend you can go back and read the entire text, translation, the purport. It's amazing. It completely describes about the Supreme Absolute Truth as Brahman and how impersonalism is actually defeated. All the Upanishads are speaking these words, impersonalism actually is defeated. So Srila Prabhupada's purport is very amazing that way. I just produced a small section of it. Here Srila Prabhupada writes, the Vedic literature confirms that the Supreme Absolute Truth is knowledge and blissful pleasure. Vijnanam Anandam Brahma. Brihadaranyaka Upanishad 3.9.28. And that he is the reservoir of unlimited auspicious qualities. Ananta Kalyana Gunatmaka Usau. You see, when he first quotes, Prabhupada quotes from Upanishad, and then he says, Brahman does not mean something impersonal, he is a reservoir of unlimited auspicious qualities. So adjectives are there, qualities of the Lord are there, and he quotes from Vishnu Puran to support his statement. Ananta Kalyana Gunatmaka Usau, he says. And in the Gita, the Lord says that although he is Aja, unborn, he still appears. These are the facts that we should understand from the Bhagavad Gita. We cannot understand how the Supreme Personality of Godhead can be impersonal. The imposition theory of the impersonalist monist is false as far as the statements of the Gita are concerned. It is clear herein that the Absolute Truth, Lord Krishna, has both form and personality. I think now this is that verse, yeah. So, Avyaktam Vyaktimapannam Manyante Mama Buddhaya Param Bhavam Ajananto Mamavyam Anuttamam. Krishna says, unintelligent men who do not know me perfectly think that I, the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna, was impersonal before and have now assumed this personality. Due to their small knowledge, they do not know my higher nature, which is imperishable and supreme. Correct? So this is the perfect understanding of Brahman. The Supreme Lord was impersonal before and have now assumed this personality. And how he has assumed this personality? The foolish people, the unintelligent men think that he has assumed this personality because of his interaction with the modes of material nature. That is not correct. And Krishna says, Param Bhavam Ajananto. They do not know that I am always transcendental. And Mavavyam Anuttamam. I am imperishable and I am the finest. So you can read the purport later. Now in the 14th chapter, it's mentioned, Aho Bhagyam Nanda Gopa Vrajaukasam Yan Mitram Paramanandam Purnam Brahma Sanatanam. So how greatly fortunate are Nanda Maharaj, the cowherd men and all the other inhabitants of Rajabhumi. There is no limit to their good fortune because the Absolute Truth, we are discussing about the Absolute Truth, Ishvara, the source of transcendental bliss, the eternal Supreme Brahman has become their friend, which again directs one to personality. So these are, Paramanandam, that can refer to Brahman. There are Upanishad statements. He is Purnam, he is Brahma, he is Sanatanam. We see these words, these are basically referred in the Upanishads to Brahman. But the same words have been used here in Srimad Bhagavatam to refer to Krishna. And it also says that this is the same Krishna who is actually having eternal pastimes with the devotees in Vrajabhumi. In Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, with respect to Anandam, Srila Rupa Goswami writes, Brahmanando Bhavedesha Chet Parardha Gunikritaha Naiti Bhakti Sukham Bhode Paramanu Tulamapi. If Brahmananda, the bliss of merging in the Brahman effulgence, were multiplied 100 trillion times, it would still not equal even an atomic fragment of the ocean of transcendental bliss felt in devotional service. Right? So when the Upanishads are speaking about Brahmananda, one may seem or one may assume that he has to go to the impersonal Brahma Jyoti, But this bliss that is being mentioned, Vijnanam, Anandam, Brahma, or Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Brahma, this bliss aspect that is mentioned for Brahma, it's not talking about Brahman effulgence, it's talking about the Supreme Absolute Truth. Because Brahman effulgence, it's very limited. The happiness there is very limited. It's just a negation of all material miseries, and one has to fall down anyways. Now we have discussed that also. So they patanti adaha, they have to come back from Brahma effulgence. And the main reason for that is because there is no personal interaction with anybody. An impersonal Brahma Jyoti, it's the absolute truth, it's Advaya, it's the absolute truth, it's the supreme absolute truth, but then he does not involve in relationships with living entities. He is not interacting with the living entities in his impersonal Brahma Jyoti. Okay, so those who want to merge into impersonal Brahma Jyoti, or those who want to attain impersonal Brahma Jyoti, Krishna understands that they don't want any relationship with me. So although impersonal Brahma Jyoti is actually one of the features of my personality, of myself as the absolute truth, still it is separate because they don't want to interact with me, I also will not interact with them. So that's why it's like punishment for those who want to merge into impersonal Brahma effulgence. It is absolute truth, it is conscious, but still there is no relationship. That's why devotional service establishes one in relationship with the Lord. That's why devotional service is actually higher than jnana. Many Mayavadis and impersonalists say that bhakti is to be used to attain transcendental knowledge, and after transcendental knowledge is attained, then bhakti should be given up. But no, devotional service is not only serving, of course, it's service to the Lord, but the primary characteristic of devotional service is to re-establish our lost relationship with Krishna. So that relationship is there, and only when there is relationship, then there is rasa. So when this interaction of bliss or happiness comes only when there are two people around. Correct? So when Krishna is there, the Supreme Absolute Truth, and then the living entities, the jivas are there, the devotees are there, then there is exchange of rasa, which actually situates one in proper knowledge, perfect knowledge, Vijnanam and then Anandam. It leads one to Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Brahma. It leads one to Satyam, that which is imperishable. In Brahma Jyoti also, if one goes to Brahma Jyoti, he has to fall down. So that situation also is not an imperishable situation for that person. He has to come down, and then he again gets into this material world, and his body is perishable. He has to take repeated birth and death. So Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Brahma, when it refers to Brahma here, Satyam basically is imperishable. Jnanam, full of transcendental knowledge of one's relationship with Krishna, and that situates one in perfect Ananda. That is Ananda, and that is Brahman. Especially Rupa Goswami says here, Brahmananda, the bliss of merging in the Brahma effulgence, were multiplied 100 trillion times. So many zeros after one, it would still not be equal to an atomic fragment of the ocean of transcendental bliss felt in devotional service. And the main reason for that is rasa, is because of interaction, relationship with Krishna. So that's why Prabhupada also said, no, that one has forgotten his eternal transcendental relationship with Krishna. He has to re-establish one's relationship with Krishna. So relationship is very important. So devotional service, the sadhana bhakti that we perform, it has to be understood that Krishna is always with us. In 5th chapter also, Krishna says, the last verse, how does it start? 5th chapter, last verse, Bhagavad Gita. Bhoktaram ekatapasam sarvalokam maheshwaram suhridam sarvabhutanam gyatmamam shantim richati. There is a suhridam. So that gives an indication to one's relationship with Krishna. So Krishna is well-wisher for us. And whoever is our well-wisher, we also want to do something for that person. We also want to interact with that person, right? So that is the absolute truth. So we'll channel. There are several references, and Srila Radha Damodar Goswami will take us to that gradually. But then this is what it actually means. So when Upanishads are speaking about Brahman, they are speaking about the absolute truth, the personality of Godhead. That's why Srila Prabhupada, wherever he writes, Supreme Personality of Godhead, it's personality. The Supreme Personality of Godhead has three features, Brahman, Paramatma and Bhagavan. But then the absolute truth means the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He changes this term or uses these terms interchangeably. When with referring to Krishna's spiritual abode, it's mentioned Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Yad, Brahma Jyoti Sanataram, Yadhi Pashyanti Munayo, Gunapaye Samahitaha. Lord Krishna revealed the indestructible spiritual effulgence which is unlimited, conscious and eternal. Sages see that spiritual existence in trance when their consciousness is free of the modes of material nature. So this particular section comes when Krishna reveals the spiritual abode. to I think the inhabitants of Vrindavan. And these are the words which are used: Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Yad, Brahma, Jyoti, Sanatanam. Now, these are normally referred to Brahman effulgence, but then Krishna, the verse, the Shukdev Goswami is speaking this verse with respect to the abode of Krishna himself. Golok Vrindavan. From Jaiva Dharma, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur quotes this. He says, Supreme Absolute Brahman is the embodiment of truth, knowledge and eternity. He is transcendental to the purview of material time, place and senses. One who has realized that the Supreme Brahman is simultaneously situated both in the spiritual sky and in the hearts of the Jiva becomes sublimely connected with this omniscient Sri Hari in a loving relationship which completely fulfills all the spiritual desires of the Jiva. So, the Supreme Absolute Truth Brahman is there in the spiritual sky and he is also there in the hearts of the Jivas. So, he is there in the spiritual sky as impersonal Brahman and Bhagavan, but as Paramatma within this material world he is situated within our hearts also. So, attaining the Absolute Truth, reaching the Absolute Truth, connecting with Him, having a relationship with Him is actually not difficult within this material world also. One just have to have this knowledge and understand and apply this knowledge, use this knowledge for recultivating that relationship. So that's why we are actually never disconnected from Krishna. From Krishna we are always connected. Okay, that Krishna knows, but then we have forgotten that. So that is our problem. So therefore we have to re-establish that connection. So even within this material world also, it is quite easy to think of Krishna, to understand all this. So that's why it is also said, one who attains transcendental knowledge, he becomes liberated. So what is that transcendental knowledge? That transcendental knowledge is that the Lord is there within my heart and I only have to think about Him. Manmanabha madbhakto madhyajivam namaskuro. These are the activities that I have to perform and then I will be able to establish his relationship, my relationship with Him in 1 second. Prabhupada, this Guru Maharaj gave a lecture, I think 2 days back, it was published, about whether the Jivas fall down and all. There he mentions, he wrote a couple of quotes from Srila Prabhupada. I think it was one letter and another was a purport from Chaitanya Charitamrita, if I remember correctly. And there he writes that it just takes 1 second for one to realize the Absolute Truth, to come in connection with Krishna. If he understands that he is suffering with this material, his eternal position is in relationship with Krishna, just 1 second he is liberated. So liberation is not something which we have to say, I don't know whether Brahman is great or not. Liberation is a very great process. It's not like that. Okay, so Brahman can be attained, the Supreme Absolute Truth. Krishna, we can establish our relationship with Him. We can start serving Him right at that exact moment, right now. It is possible. Okay, right now one can achieve liberation. So that is possible. So when scriptures speak about attaining, one who attains knowledge, he becomes liberated. This is how one gets liberated, by attaining knowledge. That Krishna is very near to me. He is situated in my heart. Sarvasachaham hridi sannivishtaha is always situated with me. So this all these references that we are seeing, it connects us to the personality of the Absolute Truth. Actually, Jiva Goswami in his Paramatma Sandarbha, he says that Vedanta Sutra 1.1.1, or rather commenting on this particular Vedanta Sutra verse, this Athata Brahma Jigyasa, that Satyam Param in Srimad Bhagavatam 1.1.1 is connected to Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. You see, the last line of the first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam is Satyam Param Dhimahi. So Sri Jiva Goswami actually never commented on the Vedanta Sutra as such. He has referred to different Vedanta Sutras, the Sutras itself from Vedanta Sutra, but in Paramatma Sandarbha, to establish the Supreme Personality of Godhead and his relationship with the living entity and how he is apart from the material nature, he gives commentary on the first 5 sutras of Vedanta Sutra. Okay. And in the first sutra, the commentary of the first sutra, he says Satyam Param Dhimahi. From Srimad Bhagavatam, we understand that Satyam Param Dhimahi actually refers to Vasudeva, because the verse itself starts Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Then is the same Vasudeva who is Janma Deseto Anvayat Itarastashtarte Shabhikyaswar. Then his characteristics are mentioned. And finally, it is said that this Vasudeva is Satyam Param Dhimahi. So this Satyam Param, he is the Supreme Absolute Truth onto which Dhimahi one should meditate upon. One should meditate upon the Supreme Absolute Truth. And Jiva Goswami says, in Taittiriya Upanishad mentions Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. It refers to the same Absolute Truth. So again, leading us to the personal form of the Lord. In Srila Prabhupada, in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 40, text 27 purport, he mentions In spite of being raised to the Brahman platform, there is a chance of falling down if one is not engaged in the devotional service of the Lord. In the Vedic language, it is also said, Raso vai saha, rasam hivayam labdvanandi bhavati. When one understands the personality of Godhead, the reservoir of pleasure, Krishna, he actually becomes transcendentally blissful. You see, if we'll just go back a little bit, and we see from Taittiriya Upanishad it's mentioned, Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. This is 2.1. Later, in the same Taittiriya Upanishad, it is mentioned that Raso vai saha rasam hyevayam ladvanandi bhavati. When one understands the personality of Godhead, the reservoir of pleasure, he actually becomes transcendently blissful. So although in the previous code it's mentioned Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma and all, but then Rasa is possible only with personality. The Supreme Lord is full in 6 opulences, and when a devotee approaches him, there is an exchange of these 6 opulences. The servant of the king enjoys on almost equal level with the king, and so eternal happiness, imperishable happiness, and eternal life accompany devotional service. This is the conclusion. Therefore, realization of Brahman or eternity or imperishability is included in devotional service. This is already possessed by a person who is engaged in devotional service. So one who is in devotional service, he is not attracted or attached to anything that is material, because he is already experiencing happiness, which is eternal, which is imperishable, which never diminishes, and eternal life, because it accompanies devotional service. And practically speaking, if we think we are still struggling, that's because we are not perfectly engaged in devotional service. The sadhana bhakti is going on, but then we are also influenced by the modes, unfortunately. Now this is from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 12. Krishna is known as Ananta Virya Sarvagya because everything is known to him. Because he knows everything perfectly well, it was not difficult for him to find a means by which he could save the boys and at the same time kill the demon. Thus he also decided to enter the demon's mouth. Just a reference for Sarvagya. Yaha Sarvagya Sarvavit. We saw that, so he's Sarvagya, he knows everything. Now, I think this is the conclusion. So from this is from chapter 10 of Canto 10 of Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 87, text 2. This is derived from Sri Jiva Goswami's Vaishnava Toshani commentary, and he says that the indirect statements of the Upanishads actually refer to the personal qualities of the Lord. He says, far from presenting the absolute truth as ultimately impersonal, the Upanishads speak at great length about his personal qualities. The absolute described by the Upanishads is free from all inferior material qualities, and yet he is omniscient, omnipotent, the master and controller of all, the universally worshipable Lord. He who awards the results of everyone's work and the reservoir of all eternity, knowledge and bliss. The Mundaka Upanishad states, Yah Sarvagya Sa Sarvavid Yasya Jnanamayam Tapaha. He who is all-knowing, from whom the potency of all knowledge comes, he is the wisest of all. Which means he possesses intelligence. In the words of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, Sarvasya Vashi Sarvasya Shanaha. He is the Lord and controller of everyone. Yah Prithvyam Tishthan Prithvya Antaraha. He who resides within the earth and pervades it. And so Kamayata Bahusyam. He desired, I will become many. Similarly, the Aitareya Upanishad states, Sa Aikshata Tats Tejo Srijata. He glanced at his potency, who then manifested the creation. While the Taittiriya Upanishad declares, Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma, the Supreme is unlimited truth and knowledge. So there are several verses, several references from Upanishads like this, which basically directs one to the personality. Okay, one more aspect, I think just before we move to the next section, is at several places in the Upanishads, the text which is given is actually spoken with reference to the living entity. Okay, it's spoken with reference to the living entity, but then the same text is also applicable to the Supreme Absolute Truth. Like this, we say, this is from Chandogya Upanishad 8.1.5. Ya Atma Pahata Papma Vijaro Vimrityor Vishoko Vijighatso Pipasaha Satya Kama Satya Sankalpaha. Remember, we saw this reference. This is the reference which is given in Vedanta Syamantaka as that which is speaking about the absolute truth. Right? Satya Kama Satya Sankalpa. So Niveshtavya Sa Vijigyanasitavyaha. You should inquire into the soul who is untouched by sin, free from old age, free from death, free from sorrow, free from hunger, and free from thirst, whose desires are always fulfilled and whose intentions are always successful. You should inquire about him. Now, if you see, in Vedanta Syamantaka, Satyakama, Satya Sankalpa, Srila Radha Damodar Goswami is using it for the Supreme Absolute Truth, for Brahman. But if we see the context of Chandogya Upanishad, it is basically speaking about the living entity. So, how do you understand this? So, the understanding to this comes from Vedanta Sutra. Okay. So, now this statement refers to the soul in Chandogya Upanishad, but these qualities are understood to be that of Paramatma. This is according to Vedanta Sutra 1.3.20, Anyarthascha Paramarshaha. The consideration, Paramarsha, of the Jiva's soul is for the purpose of understanding the other, the Supreme Soul. This, I am not put Baldev Vidyabhusha's commentary on Tattva Sandarbha on this, but then he refers this particular sutra and he says that there are statements in the Upanishads which are actually speaking about the living entity, but if you see a broader context, from the qualities of the living entity, one should actually understand that this is referring to the other, the Supreme Soul. Okay, so this is also, when we do this word jugglery and convolution, we can say, oh, because of this particular statement, therefore the Jiva and the Brahman is same. And when Jiva becomes liberated, he becomes Brahman, he merges into Brahman or whatever. But then, Srila Vyasadeva, knowing that this is going to happen, he gives in Vedanta Sutra that no, this is not the proper understanding. You impersonalists, you are not understanding it properly. When such statements are given in the Upanishads, you have to understand that it's actually talking about the Jiva soul with reference to the Supreme Soul. That is how it is to be understood. And then our Acharyas, Baldev Vidyabhushan, he comments on this, giving several references from several Upanishads that this is how Upanishads have to be understood. So these are the contexts, these are the references, and so on. This, I can do that here, but then it will take us from our study of Vedanta Syamantaka. So the references are available for anyone who wants to go and study. Right? Okay. So, right. So I will skip this reference, but it's a side topic, so I'll kind of skip this particular reference. Just to give a brief idea of what it's speaking about, in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 15, from text 16 to 18, it is considered as one of the essence or one of the explanations, or it explains the tattvas of the absolute truth. So, dvavimau purushau loke ksharas chakshara evacha ksharas sarvani bhutani kutasthokkshara uchyate. So, Srila Prabhupada translates, there are two classes of beings, the fallible and the infallible. In the material world, every living entity is fallible, and in the spiritual world, every living entity is infallible. So, this is a translation that Srila Prabhupada gives. This following Baldev Vidyabhushan's translation, he also gives the same way. But Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he gives a unique understanding to this. He says there are this fallible, there are dvavimau purushau loke. Within this material world, there are two entities. One is Kshara and another is Akshara. So Kshara refers to the Jiva and Akshara actually refers to Brahman. Okay, it refers to Brahman, and because Sarvam Khalva Idam Brahma, Brahma is all pervading, so therefore Brahman is there with this material world also. So Kshara refers to the living entity and Akshara refers to Brahman. Okay, so now we have living entity and Brahman. The next verse, it's Uttama Purushastvanya Paramatmeti Udahartaha Yolokatrayam Avishya Vibhartavyaya Ishvaraha. Besides these two, there is the greatest living personality, the Supreme Soul, the imperishable Lord Himself, who has entered the three worlds and is maintaining them. So now this is speaking about Paramatma feature of the Lord. So Uttama Purushaha. We saw this, Srila Radha Damodar Goswami also quotes this as one of the 5 references that he gave, the 5 quotations that he gave from Shruti. Uttama Purusha. This Uttama Purusha basically refers to Paramatma. So Kshara, Akshara, and then Uttama Purusha. There is living entity who can fall down within this material world. Akshara, which is Brahman, which is all pervading. And then there is Uttama Purusha also, who is the Paramatma feature of the Lord. And then in the 18th verse, he says, Yasmat Ksharam Atitoham Aksharadapi Chottamaha Atosmi Loke Vedecha Pratitah Purushottamaha. So, because I am transcendental, beyond both the fallible and the infallible, and because I am the greatest, I am celebrated both in the world and the Vedas as that Supreme Person. So, here the Ksharam refers to, this is according to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary, Ksharam refers to living entity, Akshara refers to Brahman. Cha Uttama refers to the Paramatma feature of the Lord, and Krishna says that I am beyond all this. Atosmi loke vedecha. So therefore, in the Vedic literatures, I am celebrated as that supreme person. Pratitaha Purushottamaha. So I am celebrated. So all these three, Jiva, who is conscious, Brahman, which is also conscious, the three features of the Absolute Truth, Brahman, Paramatma and Bhagavan, all these three are actually included in these three verses. So he says, there is Jiva, okay, Jiva, and above that Jiva is called Kshara here. It means he can fall down, okay. And then Akshara is mentioned. So that which cannot fall down is the impersonal Brahman. Then there is Uttama Purusha, the Paramatma, who is above that, the higher feature of the Absolute Truth. And beyond all these three, beyond the Kshara, this Akshara, this Uttama Purusha, I am Purushottama, I am beyond all this. So he is making a clear distinction of these four. There is Jiva who is conscious, I understand, but the Jiva can never become Akshara, or he can become Akshara when he comes in contact with the Absolute Truth, when he never does not fall down, when he becomes infallible. But then above that, above the infallible, above Paramatma, I am the one who is celebrated both in this world and in the Vedas as that supreme person. So I added this particular reference here because in the Upanishads we are speaking about Brahma. It's basically strengthening our discussion till now that when Upanishads and Vedantic texts are speaking about Brahma, this is the understanding that one should get. So there are Jivas, there is Brahman also, there is Paramatma also, but the Supreme Person, the Absolute Truth, is actually beyond all this. And these verses, these three verses from Bhagavad Gita basically prove that point. Okay, so yeah, Srila Prabhupada writes about this. Then, yeah, the conclusion is Ishvara Parama Krishna Sachidananda Vigraha Anadiradir Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam. Impersonal Brahma realization is the realization of a Sat feature, eternity. Paramatma realization is the realization of Chit and Sat, that's eternal knowledge. But Bhagavan realization is inclusive of all these three, Sat, Chit and Ananda. So perfect Ananda can be achieved only when one has Bhagavan realization. So Vijnanam Anandam Brahma, Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma, all this Brahman refers to actually the Vigraha, the form of the Lord. Because bliss is possible only in Bhagavan feature of the Lord. In Sat feature, in Brahman feature, only eternity is there. So when it says Vijnanam Anandam Brahma, so Vijnanam is full of knowledge and Anandam is bliss or consciousness and bliss. So whenever this word bliss comes in the Upanishads, it's actually referring to the Vigraha of the Lord, because Brahman is only the Sat feature of the Lord. Paramatma is only the Sat and Chit feature of the Lord. But Bhagavan has this bliss feature also. So that is the demarcation. Okay. So next, Sri Radha Damodar Goswami says, he is also the Supreme Lord of all and is free from birth and death. Okay, so Srila Prabhupada writes in his purport to Canto 2, Chapter 6, Text 40 and 41. Yeah, he writes, here is an estimation of the Lord apart from his transcendental activities in the temporary material creations. Mayavad philosophy tries to designate the Lord as contaminated by a material body when he accepts forms of incarnation. This sort of interpolation is completely denied herein by the explanation that the Lord's position is pure and unalloyed in all circumstances. According to Mayavad philosophy, the spirit soul, when covered by nescience, is designated as Jiva, but when freed from such ignorance or nescience, he merges in the impersonal existence of the Absolute Truth. But here it is said that the Lord is eternally the symbol of full and perfect knowledge. This is his speciality, perpetual freedom from all material contamination. Okay, and just to make the context, it is, he says it's free from birth and death. And what do the Mayavadis say? They say when the Lord comes to this material world, he assumes a material form. He comes taking shelter of the highest mode of material nature, pure Sattva Guna. So when they speak about pure Sattva Guna, they are not talking about Shuddha Sattva, they are talking about the mode of material nature, Guna, Sattva Guna, which is not affected by the mode of passion and mode of ignorance, by Rajoguna or Tamoguna. So purely only Sattva Guna. So that is Shuddha Sattva. That's what they define Shuddha Sattva. But then Shuddha Sattva means that which is transcendental to all the three modes of material nature. So that's why we are reading this particular reference. Srila Prabhupada says, this distinguishes the Lord from the individual common living entities who have the aptitude for being subordinated by nescience and thus becoming materially designated. The Jiva can fall down, he can come under the influence of the material nature, but the Supreme Lord, when he comes down to this material world, he is actually not contaminated. In the Vedas, it is said that the Lord is Vijnanam Anandam, full of bliss and knowledge. The conditioned souls are never to be compared to him because such individual souls have the tendency to become contaminated. Although after liberation the living entity can become one with the same quality of existence as the Lord, his very tendency to become contaminated, which the Lord never has, makes the individual living entity different from the Lord. In the Vedas it is said, Shuddham Apapa Vidham. The individual Atma becomes polluted by sin, but the Lord is never contaminated by sins. Right? So this is also coming from Vedic literatures. All these things are mentioned there. So the Lord does not fall down. So when Upanishads speak about the greatness of Brahman, they do not say that Brahman falls down into this material world. That kind of statement is not there. So how the Mayavadis make their argument is they equate the Jiva to Brahman. And therefore they say the Jiva is the same as Brahman. But then it is not mentioned in the scriptures that Brahman actually takes the form, or when he comes down, he actually falls down and he suffers reactions. That kind of statement is there for the Jiva. And then the Jiva gets liberated and then he can attain Brahman. He can attain the same nature as Brahman. But Brahman as such, Vijnanam Ananda Brahma, Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. So Satyam Jnanam Anantam means, Satyam means it's imperishable. Jnanam means full of knowledge and it's Anantam. So it's not that Brahman comes down and then he loses his knowledge. So the Jiva actually, the Jiva is not part of Brahma in itself because Jiva falls down into this material world. So but Brahman by definition itself is Satyam Jnanam Anantam. So how that which is Satyam Jnanam and Anantam come down as Jiva and suffer within this material world and experience so much suffering also? But it's not possible. There's clear distinction in the Upanishad itself that Jiva is different. He is of the same nature as Brahman because he possesses consciousness. He wants to gain knowledge and then there is experience of happiness also. But then he is not the Supreme Brahman because Supreme Lord never falls down. Okay, now next is, he is the Supreme Controller amongst other controllers. So now we directly discuss about the Bhagwan feature of the Lord. Till now, the references or the quotations that are given in Vedanta Syamantaka were about Brahman and Paramatma. And we were discussing about that, but then they were directing us towards the Bhagwan feature of the Lord. Here, it's directly, Sri Radha Damodar Goswami directly gives references from the Upanishads which speak about the personality of the Absolute Truth. So he quotes from Shvetashvatara Upanishad. He says, Tam Ishwaranam Paramam Maheshwaram, Tam Devatanam Paramam Cha Devatam, Patim Patinam Paramam Parastad, Vidama Devam Bhuvanesham Idyam, Sakaranam Karanadipadipo, Rachasya Kaschit Janitana Chadipaha. The Supreme Lord is the controller of all controllers and he is the greatest of all the diverse planetary leaders. Tam Ishwaranam, among all the different types of controllers, there is one, the Absolute Truth is Paramam, Maheshwaram, I addressed as Maheshwaram. Tam Devatanam, so there are so many Devatas. Tam Devatanam, Paramam Cha Devatam. So among the so many so-called demigods, or which the other so-called people in Hinduism call as different gods, Paramam Cha Devatam, there is one Absolute Truth who is supreme. So those who say that Hinduism actually is talking about polytheism, that there are different gods and one can choose any one of them, worship them, these different demigods, different gods. If we say demigods, they become offended. These gods, they are all representations of the Absolute Truth, this, that and all. The Shruti statements defeats that completely. This one line, Tam Devatanam Paramam Cha Devatam. Among all the demigods, there is one who is supreme. Therefore, it's monotheism. There is only one supreme Absolute Truth, according to the Vedic scriptures also. So all those people who say that in different religions, Christianity is monotheistic, Islam is monotheistic, Hinduism pantheistic, bogus. Shruti says that among all the devatas, there is one who is supreme. And there are several statements from Bhagavad Gita itself, one can understand this. Patim Patinam Paramam Parastad. Among all the leaders, he is the supreme leader. And Vidama Devam Bhuvanesham Idyam. And he is among all the leaders. We'll just read the translation here. So Supreme Lord is the controller of all other controllers and he is the greatest of all the diverse planetary leaders. Everyone is under his control. All entities are delegated with particular power only by the Supreme Lord. They are not supreme themselves. Vidama Devam Bhuvanesham Idyam. So because he has given them the quality or he has delegated his power to them, therefore they are called as Bhuvaneshas. He is also worshipable by all demigods and is the supreme director of all directors. Therefore, he is transcendental to all kinds of material leaders and controllers and is worshipable by all. There is no one greater than him. No one is his father or controller. And he is the supreme cause of all causes. So this is the definition of, we can say, Bhagavan, the Bhagavan feature of the Lord and his activity within this material world. So when he is controller of our controller, in Brahma Samhita also, the first verse itself says, Ishvara Parama Krishna Sachidanand Vigraha Anadir Adir Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam. Right? And in other places also, in Srimad Bhagavatam as well, Srila Prabhupada says that to understand Bhagavan feature, to understand the Supreme Absolute Truth, one should also understand the creation that he makes. Correct? So it's a gradual understanding. Bhagavan from our level, from a conditioned soul's level, to understand Bhagavan, one has to appreciate that he is the supreme controller. He is Sarva Karana Karanam and he is Parama Ishvara. That has to be understood. And from that mode onwards, then one can get into the personal understanding about his activities, about his qualities, about his form. So this again, now we will see. At this point of time, from this quote in Shvetashvara Upanishad, it is not mentioned who is that Supreme Absolute Truth. The name is not given. Correct? There is no name given. It's just mentioned that Supreme Lord is the controller of all controllers, is the greatest of all diverse planetary leaders, is worshipable all demigods, is the Supreme Director, he is transcendental to all all kinds of material leaders and controllers, he is worshipable by all, no one is greater than him, supreme cause of all causes. But then this is not giving the name. The text is not giving the name. And the entire Shvetashvara Upanishad also, the names are not given. But surprisingly, two names are used. The name of Vishnu is not used, Narayana is not used, Krishna is not used. The name Rudra is used. So that is why some of those followers of Vedas, Upanishads, they say Shvetashvara Upanishad is actually speaking about Lord Shiva. He is the absolute truth, like this. So we'll stop at this point. Tomorrow on Tuesday, we'll reveal the suspense at what is the proper understanding of why Rudra is being used there and how it is to be understood. Okay, so thank you so much. We will stop. The class will continue next Tuesday and we will continue with our discussion. Fine. So, we have any questions? Yes. Yes. Hmm. Okay, yeah. So the question is that in the Bhagavad Gita's introduction, we saw Srila Prabhupada writes that Brahman is a Sat feature. Brahman realization is realizing Sat feature of the Lord. Paramatma realization is realizing the Sat and Chit feature. And Bhagavan realization is Sat, Chit and Ananda. The bliss is also there. But before also, we discussed that Brahman has bliss. There is Brahmananda, which Rupa Goswami quotes. That Brahmananda is there. There is bliss in Brahman also. So is there any bliss in Brahman, in the impersonal Brahman or not? Because it's only the realization of the Sat feature. So I think I passingly mentioned that when one is Brahman realized, he becomes transcendental to the material sufferings. Okay, so because he becomes transcendental to material sufferings, there is some satisfaction or there is some amount of relief, and that relief is considered as Brahmananda. Okay, so one is situated in the spiritual realm, and because in a very remote manner he is in contact with the absolute truth, although in the impersonal Brahman feature of the Lord, there might be some amount of satisfaction or some amount of happiness there. But the realization is only the Sat feature of the Lord. So Sat feature of the Lord itself gives some amount of satisfaction, because the living entity suffering within this material world is so intense that just to get out of that itself is a big relief. No, it's like going into the harsh sun, staying there for 8-9 hours, and then coming into a shade. There is that relief that is experienced. Although it's not comparable to what Brahman going to Brahman. It's just an analogy, just to understand what it actually means. This intense sun in a desert, when you're there under the sun for 8, 9, 10 hours without water, food, this, that, and all, there's intense suffering involved. But then when you come into, say, a place where there's some air conditioning or something, there's a relief that is experienced. Correct? So, Brahmananda is that kind of relief. So, one who is not going through the repeated process of birth and death, he's transcending adibhautik, adhyatmic, adidevic miseries, he's transcending old age, disease, death, and birth, then there is some satisfaction, there is some happiness there. But because the Sat feature is not the entire, it's not the proper realization of the absolute truth, one who goes to the Brahma Jyoti, he has to come back. Because the living entity may experience happiness, but his true happiness, his true nature is to be a servant. Jivire Swarupohoye, Krishnere Nityadas. He has to serve somebody. Either he serves Krishna or either he serves somebody else. So because the service aspect is not there, Krishna is not allowing the living entity who are in Brahma Jyoti to have any personal relationship with him, because the living entities themselves don't want it. So therefore, they cannot stay there for a long time. They need activity, they need interaction. And we also discussed previously, activities actually do not arise from the material nature. The activities are inherent. Consciousness means knowledge, consciousness means activity. So activity is inherent to the jiva, and he cannot experience total bliss when he is not acting, when he is not performing anything, when he is not serving somebody. So service is bliss. So one should serve the Lord and serve the Lord's devotees. That's the proper conclusion. Yes, Prabhu.
You already gave a reference from the nectar of devotion.
Yes.
When it compares to the Brahmananda, there is a bliss, but that
Yes.
bliss, when you compare it with the oceanic bliss of devotion service,
Yes.
then you can understand the insignificance of it. So little.
Insignificant, completely insignificant. So that kind of happiness is there. Useless, so to speak. No, it's useless. Going to Brahma Jyoti is useless.
Another, in the beginning of the class, there was a discussion about this Smaranam, Mananam, Vidhyasam.
Yes.
And then there's a point of reasoning. And
Yes.
you have to reason and then understand. But then I was just thinking that the whole expression that we had, so much discussion we had, for example, that verse which refers to Satya Sankalpa and Satya Kama.
Yes.
So you can look at that verse and then you might think, okay, this may refers to Jiva, this may refers to Bhagavan. But then with reasoning we understand hearing from Acharya, so you can't ignore that.
Yeah. So we cannot ignore reasoning. Yes. So that is required. Yes. Thank you, Prabhu. Yes. So we cannot ignore reasoning. Correct. Because whatever discussions we had, basically all this philosophical speculation is what we have been doing. And it gives perfect understanding. It's in line with our philosophy. It's in line with the philosophy that Srila Vyasadeva gave. So we are trying to get closer to Krishna by doing this kind of analysis and study. Okay, so we'll stop here. Thank you so much. Srila Radha Damodar Goswami ki jai. Srila Prabhupada.